Today is the fourth day of this May 1983 7-day retreat. And our koan today is taken from the Blue Cliff record as edited by the brothers Cleary. And the title of the koan is Chang's Wandering in the Mountains. Chung Sha wandering in the mountains. One day, Chung Sha went wandering in the mountains. Upon returning, when he got to the gate, the head monk asked, "Where are you coming from, master?" Sha said, "From wandering in the mountains." The head monk asked, "Where did you go?" Sha said, "First, I went pursuing the fragrant grasses. Then I returned, following the falling flowers." The head monk said, "How very much like the sense of springtime." In another translation it says, "You're quite full of the spring, aren't you?" Sha said, "It even surpasses the autumn dew dripping on the lotuses." The compiler here of this volume, which was compiled, I think, in the 11th century, says, "Thanks for your reply." There's also a poem to this particular koan. And the poem or verse reads, "The earth is clear of any dust." The earth is clear of any dust, whose eyes do not open. First he went following the fragrant grasses, then he returned pursuing the falling flowers. A weary crane alights on a withered tree. A mad monkey cries on the ancient terrace. Changsha's boundless meaning, ah. One person said in a meeting, and this has happened a few times before, you talk a lot about fear and anguish and anxiety, pain filling the mind. What about pleasure? And I mean incessant pleasure. Said the person something, I'm not quoting verbatim, I can't do that. Everybody knows it, because it's happening to everyone. It goes together with the fear and the anguish. When that's there and the pain, then this is where the mind goes to, is attracted to. Or even if there's no fear and pain, if there's just sheer boredom. pleasurable memories, pleasurable thoughts, images, anticipations. We'll go into this later. First, want to tell a story which I've once heard or read, I don't remember where. Of a man sick and tired of the misery of his life, deciding to seek God. Contemplating, seeking God, and in his despair of not finding, calling out, God, help me. Please, God, help me. And God answers. He says, or she, whatever, the he, she, God, all right, I'll help you. But first, please bring me a glass of water. So the man gets up. He's been in solitude, has to walk quite a distance to the next village, knocks on the first door, and a lovely maiden opens the door. And instantly they fall in love with each other. Not much later, get married, and soon have 2 children, and live quite happily together. Then there comes a rainstorm, which turns into a flash flood. The house is torn away, and the woman and the children perish. The man, in his deep grief, sorrow, anguish, gets down on his knees and prays, God, help me. And God says, where is my glass of water? When things are going well for us, fairly well, let's say, there's always ups and downs, fairly well. There's little need to question. There's little need to apply the mind, to be with it, so to speak. Pleasure seems to take care of itself. It sort of inundates, it intoxicates. Maybe for the purpose of clarity, of clarifying for oneself, may be necessary to separate pleasure from joy. And the difference that we're making is that in pleasure is always involved images and ideas and memories, the whole process of thinking, and a feeling of wanting. Whereas in joy there is none of that. All of us are wanting. And that word also has a double meaning. Wanting meaning not feeling whole. Not wanting. We're always feeling wanting something. Something gnaws, something aches. There's always a feeling of emptiness somewhere at some interval of no activity. We manage to drown it out often with total activity, day and night, and we don't come in touch with this sense of wanting. And because of the sense of wanting, there is wanting to fill it, to assuage it, to forget about it, to overlay it, to distract oneself from it, and to to live in pleasure, to stimulate the senses. There are many, many pleasures, all coming out of this wanting and this sense of wanting. As the pleasure of becoming someone, as one starts out in school, getting good grades, being praised for it, being elected the class president. I don't know, it may already happen in kindergarten that there's a president. And then as one ascends, there are these clubs of which one becomes a president, or at least the vice president, or maybe the secretary. Climbing, becoming someone, and the pride and joy in the parents' eyes, and the admiration in other people's eyes around one. One often mistakes sort of looks of jealousy and envy for admiration. One isn't very discerning at a moment like that. And then if one is the president, do you see sometimes these news conferences? Ladies and gentlemen, the president, and everyone rises. Imagine how he must feel coming into this room and everybody has risen. It may be worthwhile alone to declare one's candidacy. On this recent vacation trip, we dropped in on relatives who had relatives of relatives in, and we were all talking. And one rather youngish man, maybe in his 40s, you may think how old. We had already been told how he has risen in the ranks at the Air Force base, which is close by. He is not a military man. He is an engineer of civilian status, but he has, since he works on the military base, he has the rank of a military man, and has now progressed to general with 1 star, a 1-star general. And we were already told in an awed voice by the relatives that people now rise when he gets into the room. And he told us, quite modest, but it was, the modesty we all have learned to, or have not learned to display. It's a display of modesty. It's amazing. We have to realize and understand this, that we can all give a show of modesty or humility if we have been well trained and if we're good actors. And not to mistake that for true modesty or humility. It has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with it. Humility comes when you see yourself as you are. Then, as one person put it, you start climbing down the ladder. But this man told us how when he has to fly to Washington, and there's a lot of business back and forth with the Pentagon, there's an airplane owned just for such travels, that getting on the plane and which seat you take is strictly arranged according to protocol. Who gets on there first, and no one else does before that person who has the highest rank. But mistakes are being made. One time he was admitted first, as is usually the case. A 1-star general is a pretty high in the ranks. There's a word for it, I forgot it. I once used to work for the military government in Germany. Chicken, they called it. A full general was called a full chicken. A 5-star general is a full chicken. So here he was, and a 2-star general entered after him. He had the uniform, the narrator didn't. And he said it was amazing, the awe and respect with which the 2-star general talked to me, because assuming that I must at least be a 3-star general. There is pleasure in this, and one strives for that. Millions of people do. They may never make it, but they do. And at whatever station one arrives where one is a little bit higher, one sort of sucks it dry by looking down on others. One may treat them well, but yet there is this feeling, I am higher. Look at it. And listen to how you talk to people who are supposedly or so-called working for you. Do you even say that? I have so and so many people working for me. Or are there just so and so many people in the department? One has to observe how one talks, because the language affects one, does something for one and for other people, or against. There's a pleasure to going to rallies of any kind. Rallies meaning large assemblies of people doing something together, often also with the voice. Shouting, singing, screaming, chanting. You may be hurt in throwing this all together, but if one has been in any one of those things and has observed very carefully, there are very similar physical and mental states evoked. A shiver, a quiver up the spine, and very often no feeling of me, a loss of the insignificance of the self. Just being swamped, being taken in, being part of this whole throbbing whatever. And depending on what the purpose of the gathering is, the ideas about it are different, but the feeling can be just the same. I've been at all of these different things, not at a football game, but at a gathering waiting for our Führer. I was little. It was the few times that I was allowed to go, because being half Jewish, I did not have a uniform, which I bemoaned, because I was different from everybody else in my little dress. Everybody else had these white and black, and a skirt and a black tie with this beautiful leather tie that you could just move up, and there was your tie, and this leather thing around it. I couldn't have it. I don't know whether it was a mistake or whatever. I was there at this gathering, this huge gathering, expecting Hitler to arrive. Of course he was late, he was always late, which is part of the game. The feeling rises, the throbbing, the excitement and thrill. And finally, first all these introductory cars, and then there he is. And people literally ready to throw themselves in front of the car, if need be, for the sake of one knows not what, a higher thing. And people reminiscing about this who've written books, young people, have told in all honesty that they joined the youth movement, the Hitler movement, for a religious reason. They felt they needed to do something for the country, and this was the avenue to do it. And little by little, being sucked into something, and then just not looking left or right, not thinking, and just doing what one was told to do. Of course, with it went pleasure, and again rising up in the hierarchy, getting power over others, others following one. football games. I haven't been to one. I do occasionally. Trying to wait for 60 minutes there, this football game is still going. Do you see the excitement? The self-forgetfulness of the people in their faces, in their movements. On the way out west, we stopped in a motel. There was a rather shy young man who had just taken over this motel. He said he had lived a little bit farther west, now he was here in Nebraska, and he said with glowing eyes, a little bit closer to Indiana, where my favorite team lives. And he says, I've been there for 17 years and I've never yet made Indiana, but I will get there. And he wasn't cynical or sarcastic or there was no humor in this. There was fervor. Maybe the fervor is because there is this happening which seems to lift one out of one's daily misery, out of one's daily self-centeredness. And not realizing that one has just assumed a much larger self, the self of the whole arena, of the whole country, of the whole assembly. That's now me. There's tremendous pleasure for most people in eating really without attention. As we said in the beginning, pleasure always involves images and thoughts. And greed and overeating very often is that one isn't attentive to the state of the body at each moment and the state of the eating itself, the chewing, the tasting, with care. Instead, there's greed for more. And the more is nourished by images of the food. One can think of food while one is eating food. It's a strange thing. And as long as one is thinking of more, one is not paying attention to what is going on, but it's just ravenously stuffing it in and reaching for more. And overeating in that, because there's no sensitivity. Sensitivity is overlaid with images of the food and of having it and getting it. Watch it, look at it yourself. You may find that if you eat with care and attention, it may first of all go against the grain if you've always eaten ravenously. It's difficult. You want to eat ravenously because you're wanting. But if particularly in a retreat like this where we come here to look, to attend and to question, you may find that you eat less or that you need less. If there's this careful attending and listening inwardly, looking at the piece of food rather than just having a picture of it in your mind. The pleasure of all kinds of entertainment. Did mention the games, the competitive element in the games being also a very great factor of pleasure, because it hooks right into one's own inner competitiveness or one's pain of having been loser or one's urge to be a winner. With this one identifies with the teams or individual players. Sometimes there are pictures of people watching a boxing match and they're fighting themselves. It's their fight. It is a pseudo-oneness, a pseudo-non-separation. But it nourishes all these traces that have been left in the mind of having lost, of having been beaten down, or of having been spurred to win, and the pleasure of winning, the pleasure of vanquishing, of being the victor, which is as old as humankind. Already happens in the animals, only we don't know if they have the sensation of pleasure, because it may feel good to be the winning stag, but then one walks off and the other one walks off, and pleasure is always when it's nourished by memory, or when memory nourishes it. And that may not be the case for animals. It may be over, finished. But for us, unless the thing was completely seen, completely lived through, and completely finished, this residue is there in the brain, and it acts like a magnet, pulling thoughts to it, or generating thoughts, whichever way you want to put it. As one person put it, actually, the memories are more pleasurable than the event itself. Much more pleasurable. Because in memory you can omit everything that was not so good. That's gone, and you just have the morsels. And while you savor the morsels, what is happening now passes you by completely, and the divided state is continuing. When I was younger, there was a stage in my life where I thought, unless I had music, I couldn't really live happily. Because apart from enjoying music, period, whenever there was a depression, I would turn on the record. And the depression lifted. And then the thought, what if it didn't have music? What would happen then? I can't live without it. I must have it. So do you see, when you listen to music like that, it's already not pure listening. You have to have it. Like with the food, or with sex. We'll talk about that later. And after you've had it, there's some residue left because you didn't listen completely. You can never listen completely when you have to have something. You're not with it completely because you're so much there with your wants, wanting. Today, we don't have a record player. But if occasionally there's music, someone invites us, or one happens to stumble into it, it is heard like it's never been heard before. It's amazing. And when it's finished, it's finished. It's not craved for to get it back. the pleasure of sex. I was recently talking with someone about this quite intimately and openly. This person said, having looked at it very carefully myself, I realized that most of my sexual excitement was connected with ideas and images. Maybe all of it. Of course, there's pleasurable sensation in sex. All the nerves there. But is it just that? The joy of that moment? Or are even at that moment images, pictures, memories? Of what this person is like or should be like that I'm with? The fairy prince or the fairy princess? Movie star maybe here. One sees the person, man or woman. Does one see oneself in this person's arms, embraced as one has never been embraced before? Ah, how that would feel. It's an image. I gotta get there. And everything is set in motion. But the image was there first. And the image may remain after the thing is over, the memory. And then relishing this memory, aching and paining with it. Languishing to have that again. It's not finished and over. Being together, a man and a woman, or a woman and a woman, or a man and a man. One says, I love you. Or one thinks, I want to be loved by him or her. But what is this love? When he or she says, I love you, or does nice things for you, what is this feeling you get? This feeling of it's so hard to be described, but if you look at it very carefully, you may find that it is loving yourself. Your self-love is confirmed, is nourished through the love of this other person, through, you may not use this word, may be misapplied, through the attention and the caresses, the tenderness received from this person. Apart from the good physical feeling of it, there's also something that is nourishing the me. How fortunate to be loved by her or by him. Or how attractive I must be that he or she pays attention to me. Again, nourishing the image of oneself and in love with the image of oneself. Like this old Greek legend of the god Narcissus falling in love with the image he saw of himself reflected in the pond. Couldn't look away anymore. was just spellbound by his own image. Trying to kiss it, he fell into the pond and drowned. We're aching and wanting and empty inside, shallow inside. Can we see that? Without immediately trying to fill it. Or run away from it into fantasy, which is pleasurable, gratifying, fulfilling. For a moment. It is not so forever. And as all of us have found out time and time again, pain is not disconnected from pleasure. The pain of losing what was pleasurable, losing the person who gave us pleasure, or just not plain not being with him or her, the distance, the unavailability, death. Or, as one person said, it's so wonderful in the beginning, and then why does it get stale? If I'm away from him for a while, and then we come back, it's a little fresh again, and then I'm afraid it's going to get stale again. Why is that? What is this staleness in relationship? Is it that these glorified images that one had of each other, which did trigger all this stimulation and interest and get together, that they fade because they are seen to be not applicable? The person is not a fairy princess and he's not a fairy prince. And at the same time one builds up new images of what this person did to me, how she acted, how he responded or didn't respond, and that one now carries around with one, and that does not trigger sexual interest. So one looks elsewhere, but it's a repetitive cycle most of the time. Can one look carefully and not dwell in romantic notions about oneself and others and sex and love, but look, open it up, see, discuss it with each other freely? It's difficult, so we argue instead. Or we refrain from talking and communicating altogether. And why is it we want to have a thrill all the time? Too, one can ask that too, why should there be this thrill that was there in the beginning? Why do I need thrills? Maybe because 99% of the time one lives numbly, dully, not seeing, not hearing, just thinking and doing what one is told to do, what one does mechanically. And not looking, not opening up, not vulnerable, because with opening goes vulnerability and getting hurt. But feel that. You can feel that hurt, just as you can feel the joy. You have to feel them both. You can't just feel one and evade the other. Sensitivity and vulnerability is all around. It's for everything, not just for selected people and events. So either one is sensitive all around for everyone or everything, or one is encased, grows a thick skin. And that also grows everywhere then. So there's no ability to see a little flower, or hear the birds, feel the touch of the wind, the sound of the water. Or the presence of human beings in their misery as well as in their joy. And the misery usually outweighs by far. For reasons we have talked about for almost an hour. So here's this koan, which is quite unique among the collection of Zen koans, where the teacher or abbot, whatever he was, went wandering in the mountains. Upon returning, when he got to the gate, the head monk asked, "Where are you coming from, master?" This may be the beginning of a dharma duel. What happened among teachers and students and students and students and teachers trying to test each other's understanding. It's not an ordinary testing. It really has to do with images too. Is this person going to retreat into his image of a teacher? Then the answer will not be clear and free. It will be tainted, defensive or aggressive. And that is clear to the other person. If the other person speaks out of emptiness, of no image. So this is how one can maybe better understand these enigmatic dharma duels. "Where are you coming from, master?" And he said, "From wandering in the mountains." "Where did you go?" "First I went pursuing the fragrant grasses, then I returned following the falling flowers." Aren't you rather enjoying the spring? Oh, you're full of spring, aren't you? And he says, it even surpasses the autumn's dew dripping on the lotuses. We will end here for today.